So, for men and women that are in recovery, Ashley, as we deal with most often with from sexual addiction or healing from betrayal trauma, is a certain length of sobriety a good milestone? And why or why not?
Yes, I would say that, and I'm not the brain expert, so that will have to be somebody else. But in many books, I'm a book junkie. In my own experience, my own personal life, what I see in groups, and then also in trainings that we do for recertifications, I often hear that 90 days is a key milestone. I know that when John was going through his therapy, the counselor who was an expert in the brain was explaining that if he can abstain from a few things, one was porn, and another was video games, thank the Lord. And he said what happens is that neural pathway that lights up when you use those things, and he did say porn and video games were on the same wavelength, that it quiets down and it like kind of atrophies enough, like loses control enough so that then he can do the deep work of getting to the root. And so I personally have quit many things many times. And I do notice too that after a few months of abstaining from something, it's not so much about the number, it's about giving my brain space back, and that everything we do takes up mental real estate. And we get something called decision fatigue because we're constantly tug of warring with our addiction and trying, or another phrase would be like white knuckling it, that we're thinking about it so much. And so to give ourselves a chance to really quiet that noise in our brain and free up that space, then we can do the heavy lifting of getting to the reason of why we do what we do.
And that's exactly what I was thinking, is that at first, yes, I think a length of sobriety or a length of your partner not acting out is a good milestone to have, but to be careful that that doesn't become the gauge on whether you're making progress or you're getting healthy or not. Because we know that after like a year or two, you may relapse again. That may happen. And that's a part of a lot of people's stories where new life circumstances come in, or a new traumatic event happens, or something triggers something that you thought you dealt with, but you haven't. And then a relapse happens or a lapse happens. And if you're leveraging the length of sobriety as the biggest milestone, then in those moments, your journey's crushed. But if you're able to look at it and identify that it is healthy, yes, we do want sobriety. That is part of the equation. But understand that that cannot become the why. The why is not how long can I be sober. The why is a healthy relationship and being a good friend and being a good parent and being emotionally present and healthy. And so, yes, it's okay to have that as long as it doesn't morph into the why of what we're doing.
Yeah, that's kind of my answer too, that to me, this is a yes and a no, because I think it's a danger that can make people overly focused on a behavior. And we've talked so much about how a behavior is just the outcome of deeper things. And if we're not addressing the deeper things in addition to the behavior, we may not actually be making progress. We may just be learning a different way to cope with our pain or trauma or circumstances. And so it's kind of the classic example that a lot of people are aware of, that the guy who's going to AA says, it's been 4,938 days since my last drink. But at every possible opportunity, he's outside smoking cigarettes. He's got terrible eating habits or all these other things. But man, haven't had a drink. And it's like, good for you. But has anything really changed at a deeper level? So I think that's where we want to be cautious of. If all I'm doing is counting days since my last relapse, but my relationships aren't improving, I'm not learning to live in honesty and vulnerability, I'm not practicing health in other areas of my life, I'm really not going to get that far. So we have to be cautious of that. But on the flip side, to not be aware of progress at all in terms of milestones or marking those days could also be equally dangerous. And I think this is less common, but I have heard examples where someone is almost deluding themselves into feeling good about their progress. Like, man, my relationships are improving and I'm spending more time with the Lord, and I still relapse every 2 weeks, but this is good and this is good. And they want to kind of gloss over, well, I haven't really changed much of the habit. Maybe the circumstances of how I'm responding to it are getting better. And those are good, but you also would want to look at, well, why am I not getting traction there? So it's kind of this delicate balance of, yes, it's a way that we can mark traction and see there's progress, but it's not the only thing. And it's not the only indicator if health is coming in our life. So I think if we see that with some wisdom, it can really be helpful. The other thing I thought about with milestones that we want to be careful tracking, sobriety, is looking forward. Because maybe someone in group says, man, it's been 6 years since I last relapsed, and we're in our first month and we're going, 6 years, like I can never make that. And when we look forward, it can be hard to know, how can I get there? Versus really the value of milestones is being able to look back and celebrate how far we've come. But when we're sitting in our seat looking forward, we can only do recovery one day at a time. You can't be thinking about how I'm going to get to that 5-year mark today. You've got to be thinking about, how do I make those choices today and then get up and do it again tomorrow? And that idea that recovery is a one day at a time process. So just make sure in maybe thinking of milestones or looking forward to them, you don't miss that you can only do recovery in this day in order to get to those milestones.